This is Reflections and Caveat from Thompson, Walker, and Chicago. And we have here really the leaders of the efforts in those three cities. These are the three most successful and kind of leading housing mobility programs we've had in the United States. In Chicago, starting with Gautreaux and 7,000 families, we're now in the fourth generation of some version of the housing mobility effort in Chicago. In Baltimore, which Barbara Samuels will discuss in more depth, we have currently 2,400 families going up to 4,400 families at the end of the current consent decree period. And in Walker, in Texas, in Dallas, that Betsy Julian will talk about, we had the 3,000 original families, plus they've been working with now all the families in the program. An additional 1,700 have moved. I think they're up to about 4,000 now. These are all programs that are getting really what I would call at scale or approaching scale. And it's helping us in other parts of the country where we have much smaller efforts to sort of see what's possible. And I wanted to just frame this a little bit. This has been a really rich discussion so far about public health, the relation of child and maternal health to neighborhood and housing mobility. And we just heard about education. And I guess my framing questions, and you all can talk about whatever you want to talk about anyway, but I just want to say, how do we operationalize some of the insights we've heard so far? And in particular, how do you see the programs that you're running and expanding as child health interventions? And how do you see them as educational interventions? And is that kind of hardwired into the way you design the program and the administrators see the program? And how do you have learning along the lines we've been discussing? How do you have the learning process and the study process built in to your program design? And what more are we going to learn going forward? And how do you anticipate doing that? And I think if we have time for questions, which will be mostly up to Gretchen, I think one of the things I want to hear from folks is, what are kind of the health and education questions that folks in the audience have about these programs? What questions would you like to see asked? So with that intro, you each have about 8 minutes or less. So go ahead, Alex.
Well, I've jotted down a few things I believe we've learned about housing mobility in the quarter century since, in 1987, William Julius Wilson's The Truly Disadvantaged redirected scholars to this study of concentrated urban poverty. This learning comes from a number of sources, among them Wilson's subsequent books, the ACE study and related research about childhood stress and trauma, studies by James Heckman of the investment returns from early interventions, studies by a number of scholars of the benefits of so-called two-generational forms of such early interventions, examinations by the Aspen Institute and others of place-based neighborhood transformation efforts, and work by Patrick Sharkey and Robert Sampson on neighborhood effects and their intergenerational implications. Comes, of course, from studies of mobility programs, Gautreaux, MTO, Walker, and Thompson. I've summarized my take under the pressure of time on what we have learned from this collective body of work into the following 7 points. First, continuing stress and repeated trauma in early childhood lead with high statistical probability to blighted adulthoods. Second, severely distressed neighborhoods characterized by high poverty, chaotic, violent conditions, and poorly performing schools correlate with adverse, that is, stressful and traumatic childhood experiences. Third, The effects of spending one's formative childhood years in such environments are not only statistically likely to have baleful consequences for adulthoods, but are also likely to be passed on to subsequent generations. Fourth, the record of the Gautreaux program, can't pronounce it, see? The record of the Gautreaux program was one of astonishing benefits for the children and families who succeeded in making true opportunity moves. That is, moves of considerable physical distance to different school districts in racially integrated, low-poverty communities. Although not designed as research demonstrations, Thompson and Walker continue to show that the voucher program can be used to help get children and their parents out of harm's way. Number five, compared with neighborhood transformation efforts or focused interventions on, for example, improving safety or schools, mobility programs have the enormous advantage of immediacy. Rather than waiting years for uncertain benefits while accumulating high ACE scores in their toxic environments, children can be transported into substantially improved environments with all the consequences that we have heard about. Number 6, we ought therefore to ramp up support for mobility programs such as Thompson and Walker as a way, simply put, to save children's lives. And because the MTO effort to test Gautreaux results turned out in crucial respects to be a weak intervention whose outcomes do not justify the scholarly skepticism they have engendered about Gautreaux and housing mobility, as part of the ramping up, we also ought to support new efforts to demonstrate that the Gautreaux results were no fluke. Finally, number 7, in all of this, we should, as this conference's framers have wisely suggested, in my opinion, shift our rhetoric from civil rights to public health. Childhood adversity and its lifetime effects are often cited as America's #1 public health issue. Housing mobility should come to be understood as the best weapon America has to deal with that #1 public health issue. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's an honor for me to be sitting in between Betsy and Alex because practically every single thing that I know, have learned, has come studying at the knee of these two folks here who have really pioneered first in Chicago and then in Dallas for us in Baltimore. MTO Movers, the experimental group Movers in Baltimore was only, I think, 149 families. So
more than just the folks who got offered the voucher.
yeah. So if there's any doubts, one learning I think is about can we bring this to scale? I think we're doing it. That program is going to expand due to the final settlement in Thompson, and especially a shout out here to Andy Freeman and Josh Sivan, who were really instrumental in working on crafting that settlement, as well as to a lot of other folks who played a big role in it. It definitely took a village, from the Able Foundation to some of the experts that you've heard from, to the lawyers, and not at all least the clients. So by 2018, barring some catastrophic event coming out of our dysfunctional Congress, we should increase to about 4,400 vouchers. So the other learning, I think I previewed this when I started out, was it over the years it has really dawned on me with increased power that we should pay operationally and in terms of policy much more attention to what it is that the families mean when they say a program works. What did they want? Did they get what they wanted? What was important to them? And that is moving to a safer neighborhood. A lot of that was made light of, I think, in the scholarly discussion and the policy discussion of MTO. But if we think about it in our own lives, what could be more important? And sort of the hierarchy of needs, what could be more important? And now I think what we've got is an alignment with the research science saying, yeah, this really is important. These families were right all along when they talked about the important thing to me, the reason I want to do this is to get my family to a better and safer neighborhood. And we've heard that in so many different ways. So we do these surveys of families and we ask them about their quality of life. Has it improved? 99% say yes. This chart, we do this, this is families who had been in place at least 3 years, but we do it every year and the results are almost identical every year. It echoes what you've heard here today. What's your main quality of life improvement? I feel safer. I'm less worried about crime. It's a better environment for my kids. I feel more peaceful. As Stephanie said, less stress. Yeah, there are other things that are important too, like access to grocery stores. But that is the most important thing, is the alleviation of the stress, the greater safety. And then to our surprise, sort of, that's why we added it on to the check the box question. Once you alleviate those things, what happens? I feel more motivated. I see a path. I see a path forward that I didn't see before. Do people escape crime? Yes. I mean, we all know that there's crime everywhere, right? You know, I'm sure, you know, people will seize on the Columbia Mall shooting to say, yes, there's crime everywhere. But not like the kind of crime that we're talking about. So families move from these high crime environments to neighborhoods where 78% say crime is not a problem. And 20% say it's a small problem, but from, you know, only 2% a big problem. So we also started hearing about anecdotal reports on health improvements, and we don't have social science data on this or medical data on this. Is Craig still here? We've been talking about ways we might work together and measure that. But as I understand it, self-reported data about how do you feel, you know, do you feel healthier, are your kids healthier, is important. And one of the materials in your packet is actually the story of two families, including one is Miss Oliver's, an experience with reduction in asthma that they experienced after the move. We started hearing that over and over, you know, where people talked about reduced hospitalizations. We're talking severe asthma, and I think most people in the room probably know that asthma is a really serious epidemic in Baltimore City, and I think it's the #1 reason for school absenteeism, or we're pretty close to it. So that message that we've been hearing is aligned, as you've heard, with now what the experts are saying, what the research is saying. And you know, we've heard about this evidence. I won't go through all that. I think what's particularly important to me, or what salient, I think, is that the effects are cumulative, so that not only are they passed down from one generation to the next, but they're cumulative. The longer a child is exposed to adverse circumstances, the more adverse experiences they have, the more damaging that is. And so that, I think, gives me, I think from a policy perspective too, it should give us a sense of urgency about that. And then some of the work that Sharkey has done, again, has showed that a good part of the black-white achievement gap that you know, educators spend so much time, so much resources trying to address is explained by these phenomenon that we've been talking about. So I should say, so how do we operationalize that? We're actually, the program is now under the auspices of a nonprofit organization with a board, and the board just voted a couple weeks ago to try to adopt some what are called preferences in the housing voucher world. In the voucher program, you can have local preferences for to meet local policy goals within certain limits in your program. And the preferences that we have adopted are to give the highest preferences to families with young kids, which for those purposes we're defining as 0 to 8. So at least one child, 0 to 8. Certainly many of those families will have older children as well. And to families with young children who are living in 30% poverty areas, the most distressed areas in Baltimore City. So where, just to give you a picture of where that is, the cross-hatched neighborhoods are the neighborhoods that have children and that have poverty rates higher than 30%. So we're not talking about the whole city by any means. We're not even talking about all poor neighborhoods, but these are the poorest neighborhoods. These are also neighborhoods that have high populations of African Americans, but by no means is it all African American neighborhoods in Baltimore. There are many more middle class and working class neighborhoods that are primarily African American in Baltimore. And we're not talking about those neighborhoods, we're talking about the poorest neighborhoods. And by any measure, these are the most distressed neighborhoods. So this is a federal index of distress that the Treasury Department, of all people, developed. And again, as in all these, the cross-hatching is the neighborhoods with greater than 30% poverty, and the darkest green census tracts on there are the neighborhoods with the highest distress rankings according to the Treasury Department. I owe our friends in Dallas, Mike Daniel and Betsy, the idea of looking at these Treasury Department measures of distress. And Baltimore City has also done its own neighborhood typology. And the neighborhoods that you see in orange are the neighborhoods that the city has defined as being distressed based on housing market indicators. The Treasury Department uses largely economic indicators. These are housing market indicators with the definition of a distressed neighborhood being one where there is no functioning housing market and there is not likely to be one in the near future. So we're not talking about moving families out of gentrifying neighborhoods. Frankly, there aren't too many gentrifying neighborhoods in Baltimore, for those of you who aren't from Baltimore. And even sometimes those of us who are, because most of us don't have to go in these areas that often. A lot of people don't see especially how much the neighborhoods have deteriorated even over the last 10 years, where as long as I've been in Baltimore since '83, we worried about vacant houses. Now we've got vacant blocks, right? The whole block is vacant. You drive through the streets and you see the sky through the roofs. You see all the houses with the red X's. You see children, however, living in those neighborhoods. This is a daycare center right next to or in the middle of a block that is otherwise entirely vacant. And the city is, under the Vacants to Value program, doing whole block demolition. But this is an opportunity too, I think, for expanding beyond Thompson, but building on the Thompson model to make sure that when we do relocate families that we offer them other options. I'm going to wrap up, but so in thinking about going to scale, we looked at the number, what are we talking about in the number of poor children living in very poor neighborhoods in Baltimore? Is this an unmanageable number? Or is this something that would cause us to say this problem is too intractable, we can't deal with it? And we were kind of surprised to see that the numbers are maybe not as large as we think they are. The number of families, of poor families with young children during these early years is actually only about, somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000. Yet I've just said we're going to have a mobility program that's 4,400. We have a voucher program, in the regular voucher program in the city, that is 12,000. Now those vouchers are all in use, but typically vouchers turn over at about 10% a year in most voucher programs. So, we sort of went from looking at this as a thought experiment. What could be done? Baltimore could become the first city in the country to offer every single family with young children living in a neighborhood of 30% poverty or more an opportunity for a mobility move. Not all in year 1 or 2 or 3, but over a period of years. It's not infeasible to think that we could do that and adopt that as sort of a bold policy goal. So I'd be interested in, when we get to discussion and other people's thoughts about that.
Betsy?
I think everybody's familiar with Thompson, obviously, and Gautreaux. Walker is sort of an outlier in some ways, but we're far away and we're in Texas for one thing. But Gautreaux was our model, and we filed Walker in '85, and there's been some form of mobility work going on. It's never been static. Really since about '87 when the first consent decree was signed. And so when we say there are about 4,000 families, there are about 4,000 families, I think, haven't looked recently, that are in what we'd call more the higher opportunity areas out of this 16,000, 17,000 vouchers the Housing Authority operates. But that's a moving target. Lots of families have come and gone during this past 20-something years, 25 years. So the lessons we've learned are they're not the kind, it's not as linear or as organized as Alex and Barbara have said. But the general client response that you described there, we've done focus groups, we've done surveys over the years of our clients, of clients and people moving. It all shows us basically that same pattern of satisfaction, the same issues, the same problems. Again, lots of people, lots of families, lots of moves over 25, almost 30 years. But nothing that ever suggests to us that we weren't moving in the right direction to be giving our clients and the people like them this opportunity, because it was a rights-based initiative, and it remains that today. It's not a social science experiment. It's not even a public policy experiment. It is a lawsuit to bring remedy to victims of racial discrimination in our city, and that has remained its focus all this time, and that probably has colored the way we have approached it and will approach it going forward. But one of the things we have learned consistently is that given the opportunity, people will move with really almost no opportunity other than being told they can go. Your lawyers, your clients are really not real people. We had eight moms with kids, one of whom literally slept in her car with her kids for 2 weeks rather than accept a unit in the West Dallas projects, because she said that would represent the ultimate failure for her as a parent to have to take her kids to that project. And so she waited till we could get her into another development. So it's those clients that have driven us all this time, and one of the things they've told us is, just let us go and we will figure it out. It's not a boutique program. It's not we don't offer a lot of the bells and whistles that I think are great, and but at this point, that some of the other programs rightly we should keep improving on. We're not laissez-faire, but we're more sort of, or that Texas sort of, you don't get in your business that much. And then our clients don't want us in their business very much. They just say, just give us the help we need, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. And we try to kind of follow and listen to them, but that information piece is big. And one of the big pieces is we've always given information about better schools. We've always given information about, increasingly about safer neighborhoods, because that is the first thing that our clients always say. I want my kids in a safe place. I want to be able to order pizza and get it delivered, those kinds of things. So we try to follow that line. But I think increasingly this issue that brings us here today, and I want to end with this, is coming to our fore. We have gotten people, there are a lot of people who know they have a right to go. There are a lot of people who are going in varying degrees with varying degrees of resistance. But this information, the research around the brain science, the health outcomes that our clients instinctively have known for all along, it is really crucial that we focus on that population and that information that empowers our clients. They know it, but empowers that you're right. You know what? Your kid is in fact, it is really important for you to understand. And I think one of the conversations this morning, and I know I've got to finish, but I thought this was really important today to say, you can't wait till your kid's 6 years old. Understand what we now know. Think about what we knew about tobacco 30 years ago and what we know today. Think about what we knew about lead-based paint at some point and what we know today. I'm not sure why this kind of information moves it past the civil rights issue and even past the public health issue to, I'm a lawyer. I find myself going, where's the personal injury lawsuit if we keep putting kids in these situations where the science and the data, this is not soft stuff. You are doing serious harm to children, and you know it, and you are not doing something about it. Now, I think that is going to be a challenge. A lot of people are going to be thinking about it from all their disciplines. I'm a lawyer. I'm thinking about it from that. The next 30 years, I don't think we can continue to operate the way we've been doing things, given what we now know, any more than you can continue to sell kids cigarettes, given what we now know. So I think we've learned a lot, but I think we have a lot more to learn.
I'm intrigued by the practice of doing briefing talking at every housing authority briefing. So 2 questions, because we've been discussing this in the Chicago Mobility Program as well. A, what's your sense of the take-up rate of families who then follow through with ICP? And secondly, whether or not they make mobility.
Right.
And secondly, so those briefings are only for people who have already decided to move. And we've been thinking as a matter of policy, and have been talking to HUD about that HUD should require housing authorities to remind people at regular intervals that they have a right to move. And do you think that matters?
Yes, I think it matters. And let me say, Walker is a mature program. We went through periods where the housing authority, we required them to send out letters to everybody saying you have a right. This is back in the early days of implementation, or the last 20 years. So I don't think you can give clients that message too often. And the more we know about that, yes, I think that's good. So ours is somewhat of a pragmatic way of reaching people who are at a point in time where they're going to be making a move anyway. They're open to hearing about the services. They're open to hearing about the opportunities and that sort of thing. So there's sort of a practical thing. We've got 6 counselors. We can't, but I do think, and this comes back, I think what we're going to demand of our housing authority, though, is we're now looking at how many voucher holders are in census tracts of 30 to 40. We've got 40-something census tracts that are over 40% poverty, and there's voucher holders in those. First of all, let's just talk about trying to triage. Let the housing authority ought to target those kids, or target those families. They should not have voucher holders in with this kind of evidence. It's not just a bad idea anymore. It is dangerous, and I think it is really actionable at some point. So that's the answer. I think you can.
What's the take-up rate?
Barbara, in fact, when we make usually somewhere between probably 75% sign up and ask for a callback. I have the numbers, and we get it every week, and there's so many that, but somewhere between 50 and 75 will, even for the housing choice vouchers, So these are the people who don't have to make a Walker move. They can just move wherever. They always ask for more information. And then will be people who didn't sign up, we'll get calls saying, you know, I've been thinking about that. So we feel like we get a lot of bang for our buck for that investment of that house, of that briefing, even though it's not real targeted. I think it pays off and it plants a seed.
Okay, we'll do one more quick question, Diane.
There may not be an answer for this in terms of the data capture, but I'm reminded of Shirley Eiffel's comment this morning to ask this question. And that is, it is absolutely essential and critical in focusing on that child's success, future, and the family. But as I understand the data in the conversation, we often talk, and given that's often from public housing, we talk about generally the custodial parent being the mother. So I want to understand if we begin to look at unintended consequences in terms of impacts on the relationship with a non-custodial parent, assuming there was a relationship, often which will be the father, and often in environments where transportation is an issue, what does that look like? So in my mind, as much as very clear about why the importance of it, I also want to understand what are the trade-offs we're making and thinking that through for that child and that family, and then what, as Shirley talks about earlier in terms of post-integration, what do we leave our communities, what do we leave our communities in by this model in terms of often the custodial parent being the mother, and what do we leave behind in terms of the father, and oftentimes given the impact, particularly in Baltimore, of that being a no-wage, low-wage African-American male. If this is to be successful, should we not think through those unintended impacts in a much broader way that we solve one problem and create a much more massive problem?
You want to take that?
I think the answer is yes, but. And the but part is, in most cases, many cases, that the non-custodial parent is not on the voucher, is not on the lease, and asking questions about the non-custodial parent gets in for an agency that controls that voucher, gets into some really sort of intrusive and treacherous territory for the family. And so from that perspective, it's not something I know in our program that we would ask about. And if we did, I think it would meet with some resentment. But Stephanie, I wonder if you could answer that, because in your interviews, I know you ask about everything, and I'm sure that that's part of what comes up there.
Your point is making a couple of different things, right? Which is that, we too tend to devalue fathers on some level, and there's a whole set of public policy issues around that. I think that, the first thing that comes to mind is sort of, the acute issues of being able to relieve families from the toxicity of these communities, right? And so you have to think about what your trade-offs are. I think what I have seen in studies outside of mobility programs is that it's devastating when these kids don't have a father around, and it takes and that's something that haunts them their whole lives. And so I think that I think that I know in Baltimore, especially at the Center for Urban Families, they're doing a lot of work to try to figure out how to amend some of these relationships, and I wonder how it is that we could actually connect agencies that are doing different things, because it's a critical thing that I see over the long term with these kids, and they don't have that.
What do you hear, though, in your interviews? And Jim, close your ears to whatever the answer to this question is. Do you find that the father is present in a lot of ways?
Of course it varies, right, considerably. And sometimes there are father figures who are not biological. So what I would hear is that women say, well, it's hard to date out here, right? So dating activities is difficult, right? So that's one thing. But the thing too is it depends on how often people are returning to the city for employment, and whether kids see their fathers. But I can tell you It doesn't mean that this is the whole truth, which is that if you didn't ask about it, you wouldn't hear about any of the fathers in these kids' lives, because mom is trying to juggle so much of this on her own for so long. So it's kind of, you know, we have to ask about it. What we hear is that it varies by father, and that, you know, I think there's not as much contact when people are away and living farther away. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question. It's a lot of complicated stuff, right? And I think that, you know, Kathy Eden and Tim Nelson just finished an incredible book called Doing the Best I Can that addresses this issue. What do we do about fractured families? I think it's a challenge, because the emotional consequences of missing a father can be devastating for life for these kids. But at what cost if we get them into a school system that's helping them and out of a violent neighborhood.
Right. I just want to be clear that the reason I'm posing that question as well as others, which will probably be later this afternoon conversation, which I will be here for, is important to think through the unintended consequences. I mean, Shirley's point is, I think about it all the time when we make policy. As we go down pathways in terms of triaging, let's not end up killing the body and the spirit for later with a very productive citizen on every level economically because they had better choices educationally, but end up in terms of emotion. I'm just thinking, and what does it leave us in place with? And then because even when the proximity of the neighborhood where they are now, which is not a great place, the likelihood of the father or the male or a male being involved is even tangentially. So I just want us to think about that and other kind of unintended consequences questions.
Right, and we do see a lot of back and forth between families and participants, you know, going, a lot of the family comes out to visit, a lot of participants go into the city to visit, and increasingly we also see other family members signing up for the program and moving. So it's almost like some people are moving their entire social network out to where they are.
Female headed, Barbara, that's all.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of times there is a male in the house with the family unofficially, but it does vary, and there are risks in terms of built into the voucher program in terms of adding the other parent onto the lease and so on. So it's
Okay.
There's part of that legacy that we have through our means tested programs.
Following up on Diane's question and my comment last night, we see the wonderfulness of this work, and sitting from a HUD perspective, this should not be the exception. It should be the way in which we work with families. So would we not begin to ask, what does success look like? And what are the places that we need to pay attention to in terms of, yes, disruption and fragmentation and being careful that we don't have those unintended consequences. Best intentions in the world of creating public housing, even Hope 6. And here we are today. So we can figure out ways to just ask the questions to make sure that we translate the learnings that we know.
Terrific. Okay, we're going to stop it there. Maybe we can have a future session with Professor